And so today we will focus on instructional practices through the lens of the methods discussed in Chapter 9 and your prior experience. So each of you brings your own funds of knowledge, right? So, and I'm sure that you all have talked about funds of knowledge in other courses or throughout your time at TC. But funds of knowledge essentially cultural practices and bodies of knowledge, right? Specific to your community, your students, and your families. So essentially your ways of doing are already a method or approach that you already are implementing. And I am sure when you were reading some of the methods and approaches described in Chapter 9, for those of you who were unfamiliar with it, you were saying to yourself, wait a second, I'm already doing that, right? Like, or something, oh, like this sounds like something I'm doing in my practice, which means that you already possess everything necessary to become great, right? You read Chapter 9, and you will synthesize this reading through your methods paper on next week. And so our goals, right? So you will notice that that our goal is not to become an expert or have expertise in the methods discussed in Chapter 9, right? That is not our goal today. But to cultivate your lived experience of pedagogical content knowledge and connect it with the methods. So put differently, the aim is to identify the instructional practices you are already using in your teaching to make the understanding of these methods more concrete. Okay, does it make sense to folks? If not, let me know, please. So this is our departure point of inquiry, meaning that this is our main question, and then we will move from here. And so the question is quite simple. Can I have someone read this question? Just unmute for me and just read our question.
I can read it.
Thank you, Joelle.
How would you describe your lived experiences with the methods from Chapter 9, Gordon, Kodai, Dalcroze, or Suzuka?
Yes, thank you so much. Right. So just unmute and let me know how would you describe your lived experiences with these methods. I can go first just to kind of break the ice a bit and build that relational trust, right? So for instance, I was using elements of Kodai method unknowingly, right? In my classroom, when I stressed that folk music, in my case, it was spiritual and gospel music, in the form of singing be an entry point for students, right? So I did this because my students primarily were Black Americans, meaning descendants of enslaved Africans, right? So generations had been here, they were here as Americans. And so it was a way to sustain our shared culture, in addition to providing an entry point to reading and writing music. And so when I learned about Kodai, right, like I learned that, oh, like I was kind of already doing this work in my classroom, and that these are well-known tenets of Kodai, who stresses that music and the mother tongue, meaning culture and singing, begins the process to reading and writing music. And then, as the book tells us, paves the way to art music, right, or Western European classical music. So that's how I would describe my lived experience. Can someone else build on that or point us in another direction of their lived experience?
I started, I'll talk about my lived experience as a student. I started as a Suzuki student when I was very young, and then I switched to kind of more a non-method specific curriculum when I was 7. So from 4 to 7, I did Suzuki. But I think it had a huge impact on the way that what I think about is important in musical skills, because you know, as we all read, learning by ear is as an entry point before learning to read music is such an important part of Suzuki. And I think that doing that really helped me to develop my ear training skills and my ability to kind of access music, both learning by ear and by reading. And so I try to instill that in my students as well. Even though I don't use the Suzuki method, I try to set aside time to encourage them to learn things by ear, because I think it's also very equalizing as a practice.
And I remember the first day of 3rd grade 2.0, we went into music class, and she had like lines written on the board, and she said, tap this out or clap this out and tell me what song it is. And now I know, there was like ta, ta, ti, ti, ta, whatever, right? And it was a song that I'm going through every song that I possibly know, which was limited to like songs that I had learned at synagogue, songs that my parents would play in the car, and songs from my own culture. And I didn't know this song. And she's like, raise your hand when you know this song. And it was a song that she had been teaching them since the kids were like in kindergarten. And so she had developed her own repertoire of like cultural songs within the school. There was like a school culture, if that makes sense. And so it made me feel like an outsider from the beginning, but within like 2 months, having that shared vocabulary of the songs and being able to identify what the songs were just by having the solfege syllables on the board, or the rhythm written out on the board. I went from being an outsider to being an insider. And that really struck me when I was reading about the Kodai method in the book. I was like, oh, his whole idea was to ingratiate people using the culture that they're familiar with. And here I felt like an outsider needing to learn the dominant culture of that school, to be able to access the music education. But once I had, it was a very effective tool.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. And building off of that, and I put this question in the chat as well for folks. What instructional practices, right, do or did you use in your learning space or spaces which may connect with these methods or approaches, right? And how do or did you implement these? So I'm thinking about what Ronnie talked about with the Suzuki method, right? I use the I do, and I'm sure all of you know this, right? The I do, we do, you do model, right? It's something that I use often in my practice, right? Which is similar to the Suzuki method of repetition, imitation, and modeling. And so that brings us to another question, and kind of one that I think folks have been kind of hinting at, right? Like, so do you believe in one method over the other one, right? And why do you believe that? Or do you believe in an amalgamation, right? And why do you believe that, right? And then how would you implement that amalgamation? I saw some head nods and some head shakes with this last question. So I know this is going to be an interesting conversation.
I personally was just really struck by the similarities between all of the methods. Some people are like, look, I made brownies. Look, I made a cake. And they're like, look, my thing is the best. But like at the end of the day, like I'm happy to eat all of them. So like that's kind of how I felt about the music. I was like, I really love this view. I really love that view. And like I just kept seeing the similarities more than how they're different, actually.
Definitely. Thank you so much for sharing that. I come in total agreement with you with everything that you said. Someone else want to build off of that, or has a divergent opinion there. Let's hear from folks that we haven't heard from. I cold called. For those that are in classrooms, you know what warm calling and cold calling is. So let's hear from some people who have not spoken before I start cold calling.
I agree with Julie. I think that, first of all, I think that one of the best ways to be a teacher is to grab little things from many, many different things and put it all together to kind of then create your own kind of method. And so I think that they work best when you do use them together, especially because we have, students who learn differently. And so a different method could, speak to an individual student better than another. And, we can find the little pieces of each of the methods that really work well in our classroom, or maybe we just feel most comfortable teaching, and use them all together to create a classroom where everyone feels like they can really understand what is being expressed to them.
Caitlin, thank you so much for sharing that. It has me thinking, right? What you just said, right? Like different points of entry, right? For different human beings that we're working with, right? That have varied experiences, and they bring that into our space. And I have seen people use different methods within the same lesson, right? Because perhaps this particular portion works best with this method, or this particular group of students are working with this, or they just want to give students a kind of exposure to different entry points and create different entry points to make sure that everyone has access to the knowledge that particular day. So I think that is a very rich and powerful statement, Caitlin, that you named for us. someone else please build? Or say, no, y'all are wrong. And that's the Kodai method is it and the only one. Name that. That's okay.
To me, I really have a question about that. You know, because Sudiki put the sight reading skill on the later. I learned my instrument is the piano. I think the piano is very, for the learning the piano music, piano music, at the reading is very, very complicated. So if we put the sight reading on the later age, I don't know if that's how can that work. And then to my teaching experience, I told my student, you know, that I work on the same time. Sight reading skill, I put on it played a very important part of my teaching, because I think the piano require a very strong sight reading skill. And that's, you know, I have a little bit question about the Suzuki method. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Grace, and thank you so much for bringing up that wondering and the tension that you are experiencing there. And so, in our next activity, that's something that I welcome your group to discuss as you are planning out this lesson plan, right? If you need more time, but essentially you are creating and designing a high level, now 20 to 30 minute lesson plan in your project groups, okay? And try to incorporate one of the methods. You can just use one method. You can use a kind of simultaneous use of more than one, a hybrid version of a chapter number 9 method combined with your own approaches. Wonderful job.
I guess I could go next, or we could go next. We're the Ridgedale district, and we did a lesson plan that combines. It's mostly based on ORF method, but it uses a little bit of Kodai. We just chose a song, Row, Row, Row Your Boat. And the goals of our lesson were to kind of teach them how to play the song on the xylophone and the ORF instrument, with kind of talking about proper tone quality, and then translate that. We kind of wrote this plan with the assumption that we had spent a prior class learning the song with solfege and with words, kind of more in a Kodai inspired way. So we wanted to, our goal for the students was both to have them translate the song from the singing to playing, and then also to be able to do a round with the song. And behind that is kind of our intention for us to have students understand that a group of playing music together can do two different things simultaneously. So we kind of just set out a progression of, you know, after kind of greeting and everything, where we first review how to play the ORF xylophone, modeling how you can make a sound on it, letting the kids experiment. Then we would review the Row, Row, Row Your Boat song with solfege, and then also with text, and then singing it in a round. We also kind of assumed they would have already done that. Then as a transition, we would assign groups and have half of the group sing while the other half of the group plays, and then switch, so that, and kind of repeating the song so that that each group can kind of individuals in the group can get to a point where they're comfortable with the song. Finally, we would have everyone play the instruments in unison, and then as a bonus challenge, we would have them everybody playing instruments, but in a round.
Thank you so much, the Ridgedale District Group. It was wonderful, wonderful. So I see a train of ORF happening twice now in Ridgedale. I'm not sure if that was by chance or design, but I see a little bit of coherence there with the collegiate training in the K-12 district. So that's what's up. I love that. I love coherence.
I think we got a grant to buy the instruments, and so that's, you know.
That's it. That's exactly it. Next group. Yep.
I can go next. I'm from the City University group, and our lesson was intended for kindergarten or first grade, depending on how you did it. Our objective is students will be able to read and identify quarter and eighth notes using iconic or stick notation and then perform them. So iconic or stick notation depending on where the students are at. And the repertoire we chose was Apple Tree, Apple Tree. I don't know if people are familiar with that song. The like Apple Tree, that one. So the general procedure is students would first learn the song through call and response and learn to sing it. And then they would go on to reading the rhythmic notation and being able to clap while they're singing the song. And then we would take away the singing and see if they're still able to clap the rhythms from the song without having to sing it to themselves. And then activity 4, if we get to it, incorporating some movement, having them sing and clap while also moving around the room. So we were inspired by Kodai and a little bit of Dalcroze in there as well.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Last group.
Yeah, so we're from the Metropolis district, and our lesson plan was to talk about introducing rhythm and beat to our students. And what we'd start with is telling the student the definitions of rhythm and as patterns of sounds and silences, and beats as the steady pulse. And what we start off with is a hands-on activity where we do a clap and count rhythm, where we would instruct students to clap and count the rhythms on their cards individually. And then we'll also invite a few students to demonstrate their own rhythms to the class. And then after that, we would do a group activity where we'd separate them into groups, and they would each create their own rhythmic patterns as a sort of performance. And then finally, for the last 10 minutes or so, we would have an individual activity where we use those cards that the groups have created, and then have each and every student do their own composition sorts, a rhythmic composition. And basically we incorporated a lot of Kadali and Dalcroze and Suzuki, mainly because we're trying to allow these students to gain the repetition of understanding different types of rhythms that they have, but also being exposed to the sense of practicing utilizing these rhythms. And then for the Kadali, it's basically it's simply because of clapping and counting. We're having them be more hands-on, have a hands-on approach towards learning the lesson plan here. So
Thank you so much. That was I was telling Kato earlier, that was my group when I was in the class. So I'm partial to the Metropolis group. Yes, so it seems so we had Dalcroze represented. We had 3 times. That was the most used method, it seems, which makes sense, right? Like movement, embodiment, music, rhythm, like all these things, like it makes total sense. And then I see that the ORF method was used twice in 2 different groups, and then the Kodai method was used 3 times. And the Ridgedale, the City U, and the Kodai. So sorry, and the Metropolis. So it seems as though the Dalcroze and the Kodai, which also makes sense to me because if you're thinking about Kodai's kind of salient foundational aspect of starting with singing and the mother tongue, right, kind of cultural aspect of students and sustaining that, or using that as a springboard, makes total sense. No one said Gordon. I wonder why. No one likes audiation. Talk to me.
Actually, I teach an early childhood music class called Music Together, and they base a lot of what they do on Gordon. And so Music Together pedagogy totally makes sense to me. But then when I was reading Gordon, I have a lot of trouble understanding the way it's written. Something about the way this guy, Kenneth Gilmartin, sort of parsed it out into his own curriculum is easier for me to put my head around. But yeah, I have trouble understanding it, to be honest.
I was actually going to bring up Music Together as well, because I was a Music Together kid and I'm a Music Together teacher. And applying it to Music Together, they made it work. But just reading it off the page, I was like, I've never heard of this before. And it took me like a while to realize, oh wait, no, that was like my original musical experience.
And with that, thank you so much for sharing your projects. Thank you so much for your time today. I hope we are walking away with not only a tangible product, but a kind of practical understanding and application of these particular methods and approaches, and how we can divert from them or create hybrid approaches to make sure that we are supporting the folks or students that are in front of us.